This is kind of a follow-up segment to the infamous Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith debate on Joe Rogan. So, Douglas Murray was, taking his licks on Twitter. Dave and Rogan both have pretty big Twitter followings. It's a forum much more friendly to them than to Douglas Murray, for good reason. Douglas Murray is really the lowest of the low, a true pseudo-intellectual, if there ever was one, as he exposes in this op-ed here. Written for the New York Post, Douglas Murray, so-called Israel, Hamas, Ukraine war experts spew false info on Joe Rogan's podcast. There has to be a standard. Last week, I seemed to break the internet. Don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole thing like that. We'll be here all night. But he does sound exactly like Hannibal Lecter. He has that the accent plus the vocal fry.
Mm-hmm.
Close your eyes and listen to Douglas Murray and imagine Anthony Hopkins. You cannot tell the difference. He's a dead ringer for Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
I went back on the Joe Rogan podcast.
And that's really what he relies on, because it's funny he invokes credentialism so often. He doesn't have any credentials to be speaking on these subjects either.
He's writing an op-ed in the fucking Post. I mean, this is the other irony of this, which we'll get to. I mean, the only outlet that will print him. Yeah, the only outlet that will print him is basically a TMZ tabloid rag.
Well, and that's all he's ever. That's
the only outlet that will print him.
He's only ever written in these tabloids.
Yeah, either in the tabloids or very ideologically conservative. Right, like The Spectator, I think, published him. Yeah, exactly. Last week, I seemed to break the internet. I went back on the Joe Rogan podcast to talk about my new book on democracies and death cults. Israel and the future of civilization. I like how it says Israel like that, which is sounds like a snake, like a British snake, which is available at all good bookstores and on Audible, since you ask.
Who's definitely in House Slytherin?
Yeah, exactly. I've been on Joe's podcast a number of times before and have always enjoyed it. But this time I went on with a question. Having not spoken to Joe since the wars in Ukraine and Israel started, I had become increasingly irked that the guests he had on have been almost entirely anti-Ukraine and anti-Israel, which, in my estimation, that's really not even true. I mean, anti-Ukraine, sure, because it skews more MAGA, the guests, but I haven't really heard too much in the way of blistering critiques of Israel and Zionism on Rogan's show. Really, very, very few.
Well, and he's had the trigonometry guys on.
Yeah, he's had those guys on.
He's had Brett Weinstein on.
He's had fucking Donald Trump and Elon Musk on.
Right. This is that's not a valid charge.
It's really not a valid charge.
We don't soft pedal criticism of Joe Rogan, and that's not a fair accusation.
Right. Many of the latter, in particular, are not just vindictively and maliciously anti-Israel, but have been spewing claims that are demonstrably false. Many are also people who are simply in no way expert at what they are talking about. One of these is a comedian who goes by the name of Dave Smith. Claiming some Jewish ancestry, he's spent the last 18 months since October 7th, 2023, being very unfunny indeed.
And what the fuck kind of thing is that to say?
Yeah.
Well, he claims to be Jewish, but Smith is a rather odd name for a Jewish man.
Specifically, he has decided to spend his time going around the podcast world sounding off about Israel.
There's something of the Paddy in him.
By the way, these when you see on the slides here, every sentence is its own paragraph. That's not how I copied it. That's actually how it appears on NewYorkPost.com, with 3 ads for hairspray coming up, popping up on the screen every 3 or 4 sentences. So when you look at this op-ed, it's actually very short because every paragraph, every sentence is its own paragraph. In the process, he largely cites people like him, people who have made many views but no obvious expertise.
You mean like yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Like him.
You mean like yourself?
Yeah.
What obvious expertise do you have?
Yeah,
well,
what
have a
expertise?
Degree in sociology, psychology, political science, history. He has an English degree.
People like Daryl Cooper, who says he isn't a historian, yet has been invited onto some of the world's biggest podcasts as a historian. One of Cooper's many ahistorical claims is that Winston Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. On these and many other occasions, Cooper has simply lied about history. When invited to debate the world's foremost living expert on Churchill last year, he declined, saying that he didn't know enough to go against such a figure. Yet Cooper still gets invited on show after show to throw out falsehoods that he can't even back up, and on which his online interviewers seem happy to not challenge him. Another such figure from the world of comedy who is changing his shape to fit the time is Rogan guest Ian Carroll. Now, this is where he starts getting his facts wrong. To my understanding, Ian Carroll, not a comedian. I've never heard anything about Ian Carroll being a comic. He does not come from the world of comedy.
No.
He just kind of appeared out of nowhere and started talking shit about Israel, but also talking about how we need to support Donald Trump, and now he's hosting InfoWars. I think he comes from the world of the CIA. That's where I think he comes from the world of. I don't think he comes from the comedy world. I think if he comes from any world, that's where it sounds like he's coming from.
I mean, I gotta say, it's like, Nico House did a video about that he made a lot of good points about, the algorithm doesn't work this way. Like, why did this guy come out of nowhere and try to find anything about him from before he all of a sudden appeared out of nowhere? So look, I mean, be that as it may, that's a very weird thing. Like, so you just like read other people's conspiracy shit and you just repeat it. Like that's the gig.
Yeah,
I mean, because if that's the case, we both have Whitney's book. Let's just start fucking.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's
we just recycle that.
Yeah, recycling what she says.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, whatever the truth is behind Ian Carroll, he does not come from the world of comedy, as I understand. And then he goes on to, I think,
no, he does not.
Confuse even more about him. He says, "This is someone
that that's the kind of mistake a non-expert would make."
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's a very sloppy mistake for an intellectual of the gravitas that Douglas Murray purports to have with his name. This is someone who, when he last went on Rogan's podcast, very carefully tried to minimize the evil of Adolf Hitler. I'm pretty sure he's still talking about Cooper, but confusing him with Ian Carroll, because the next thing he says is, outrageously and completely falsely, Carroll claimed that in the 1930s, Hitler had kept his anti-Semitism down. No, that was definitely Cooper who said that. It was definitely Cooper. He says, so it's not Ian Carroll. So again,
that's amazing. In an article where essentially you're trying to attack people for lack of expertise and knowledge,
accuracy.
You're getting everything wrong.
Confusing the guests, saying this guy's a former comedian who said something that in fact it was Cooper who said it. A provably false claim that Rogan did nothing to counter. 2 weeks ago, Rogan has his mate Dave Smith on yet again for a long podcast. But for my return to the show, see, this is interesting. Here's some tea. For my return to the show, the deal was that I could come on only if Dave Smith was once again in the studio. Maybe Rogan thought, you know what? Before I invite this maniac Douglas Murray on, since I'm not equipped to push back on what he says, maybe I should bring Dave in, who knows his stuff on Israel pretty well, so that there will be somebody there to push back. For my return to the show, the deal was I can come on only if Dave was once again in studio, as if Joe didn't want to be unaccompanied, or that Joe thought it was I, of all his guests, who must be challenged. From the COVID lab leak to the Hunter Biden laptop, we have lived through years after which distrust of experts has become inevitable. Yet that doesn't mean that expertise does not exist. It does not mean that a comedian can simply hold himself out as a Middle East expert and should be listened to as if he has any body of work. It does not mean that someone who says they are not a historian but who practices false history should be cited as a historian. This point seemed to rile both Smith and Rogan. It appears to have riled their audiences even more, because many people seem to think that what I mean is that they are not allowed to have an opinion. That is wrong. I think they are. It's just that there should be a price to pay for spreading bullshit. And part of that price
you don't
is
say.
That you should be called out. Yeah, no, you don't say. No, yeah, no. Speaking of spreading bullshit, I have some more information on that. Journalism has had its own meltdown in recent years, but it doesn't mean that we don't have standards, much though that might amaze some people. What the standards are in the new media, especially on podcasts, is still being worked out, but there must be some. Otherwise, the new media will lead people into errors and evils far greater than the old media could ever dream of. So in the part that we didn't publish because we don't want to run into any more issues with the apparently strapped for cash Joe Rogan Experience show, we got into that where we talked about how, yes, obviously the claim, it's a point that we've made several times on the show. The fact that the media has discredited itself so thoroughly has created a lane a mile wide for every grifting scam artist to just pick an issue out of the air and say everything you know about X is wrong and subscribe to my podcast and join my Patreon for the secret knowledge.
How did they get through the Van Allen belt?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And we think Cooper, fits that category very, very well. And we talked all about that. We're not going to rehash all of that now. The problem, of course, with Douglas Murray making that point is that he is amongst the most guilty parties in terms of people who have discredited the establishment media. This is Douglas Murray's big 2-page op-ed, once again, in the New York Post, the only outlets that will print him, which, speaking of my points, how little self-awareness must you have to write a column for the New York Post lamenting the degradation of journalistic standards? Like, it doesn't occur to you, hey, the only publication that will print my op-eds is this obvious, like in New York City, the New York Post, it's a joke. I mean, it's a gag paper, it's a tabloid. It's like 2 steps above the Star magazine or like the National Enquirer. It's like 2 steps above Bat Boy, pretty much. So yeah, this is a dictator and 10 other Ukraine war truths we ignore at our peril. This is in response to Donald Trump's meeting with Zelensky, the infamous meeting in the Oval Office. Douglas Murray, how MAGA lost its way on Ukraine. Still a Ukraine hawk to this moment. That dated March 6th, 2025. This is from 2022.
He's still a freaking Iraq hawk.
Of course. This is no time for contrarianism on Ukraine, dated December 2022. Well, turns out that would have been a great time for contrarianism on Ukraine. And yes, this is an op-ed dated July 2023 saying, was I right about Iraq? 2023, was I right to champion the Iraq war? He based this thought experiment on a trip that he took where the Kurds were dancing and picnicking in territory that was previously under Saddam's reign, and thought, this made that all worthwhile. So maybe I wasn't wrong about Iraq. And of course, at the time of the Iraq war, he had just published this book as a very young man. He's young. He's only like 45, 46 years old. So he was in his early 20s when this book came out. Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, by Douglas Murray. One of the publicity quotes there is, at last, the right's answer to Michael Moore. So even where he makes a valid point about the sort of implosion of mainstream media creating opportunities for grifting know-nothing hacks to fill the void, he's the last person who should be making that point, because it's guys like him who have discredited the media. And he's a know-nothing hack. But the fact that he's had access because he parrots establishment bullshit on most issues, right? He was out in front of the COVID thing more than most. But on foreign policy, he is, every State Department talking point you could think of dating back 20 years, he has parroted at the top of his lungs. And so he's gotten access to certain publications like the Post and like some of these overseas publications. It is that perspective, that arrogance, combined with total ignorance of the way politics actually unfolds, proven time after time after time. How could you get wrong one war after the other, after the other, after the other, never learn a damn thing? That's Douglas Murray. So it's guys like Douglas Murray who created the vacuum of credibility that guys like Daryl Cooper filled. So even if he's right about Daryl Cooper, he's the last person who should be making that point.
Please clap.